A warm welcome to today's video explaining eliminative materialism for philosophy A-Level. This video will break down the theory and the three criticisms that you see here. I will just, before we get into things, recommend you go into this video's description. There are practice questions that you can access that I've written that you can practice this material on. And there's also a completely free course that I've made on the technique of philosophy A-Level. So if you've ever been unsure about how to get the top marks, if you're struggling, stuck on middling marks for the essays or for any other question, I have guidance from my years of tutoring and from getting the top marks myself on how you can get the top marks. That's completely free. You just click the link, it's a Notion page, you duplicate it, and everything is available for you. I'm not looking for your email, I'm not looking for any payment, there's no upgrade or anything like that. It's just a course completely for free, so check that out if that sounds valuable to you. With that being said, let's explain eliminative materialism. So materialism, this form is from Churchland, Paul and Patricia, a little power couple for you, and they are rejecting the folk psychological accounts of some mental states, or all. So they might say something like beliefs, desires, qualia don't exist, and because they're a don't exist, they're an anti-realist. They fit into that camp, and so they might think of beliefs as something that don't exist. If beliefs don't exist, then we should eliminate talk of them. Okay, we should eliminate that kind of discourse because they don't even exist. Okay. The way they can justify that claim is with neuroscience. So the eliminative materialist is going to work really closely with neuroscience. They're going to investigate the brain. They might be able to explain behaviour in a way that doesn't need reference to, beliefs, desires, qualia, and there are many more examples of mental states. We find that we can explain behaviour in a way that does make reference to these, and so we should eliminate the excess discourse. So we should eliminate the folk psychological concepts because they don't exist. When we talk about folk psychology, what we're referencing is this common sense view of how we explain behaviour. So I walk to the fridge, I might analyse that behaviour in terms of being hungry, the belief that there's food, whereas the eliminative materialist will go about it in a different way. They'll explain that behaviour in terms of science. So they'll talk about dopamine, neuropathways, metabolism, and that serves as their analysis. The eliminative materialist is not committed. They're not committed to the view that all psychological concepts definitely don't exist. All that they're committed to is saying science has helped us and will continue to help us understand mental states better. As science is helping us do that, we might find that some of the folk psychological mental states actually don't exist. Beliefs don't exist. We can explain all of the behaviour connecting to beliefs in terms of science, and we don't need the concept of beliefs anymore, and therefore it should be eliminated because beliefs simply don't exist. That's what the Churchlands are arguing for. That's their position. And just to end on, I want to note that this isn't really a theory as such, it's more of a project. I think what the Churchlands are trying to do is a project in philosophy, a project in science. They're trying to say that they're partaking this project, which is slowly going to reject folk psychological concepts as we have reason to reject them. It's less of a theory in that traditional sense. So let's move on. Certainty about our mental states takes precedent over other considerations. This is the first criticism. So, science is really good at establishing knowledge. It has established various important bits of knowledge before, dopamine, neuropathways, this kind of thing that I referenced earlier. But the knowledge that we can establish from our own intuition, from merely thinking about it, from introspecting, is just as good, if not better, and more reliable than what science can generate. Think of Descartes in this case. So Descartes established that he can be more certain of the knowledge he can establish with his own mind than the knowledge that his senses can establish, because his senses are inherently doubtable, right? They make errors, and so we have to doubt them. And therefore, anything empirical has that element of doubting, which, when we just establish knowledge from reasoning alone, it doesn't contain that level of doubt. When I analyse my own behaviour, I establish beliefs and desires, I establish the what it is like, the qualia of various sensations. That knowledge is more certain to us than anything that science can establish. And so when science tells us to reject beliefs and desires and qualia, it may do in the future, it may not at the moment though, but when science demands that we need to do that, we actually should be, and we are, more certain of what our own mind can establish. That's a more certain type of knowledge. And so, it isn't really quite clear, this response suggests, it isn't really quite clear that even if science establishes these things, we've got other reason. So if science establishes, to make this more clear, if science establishes that qualia doesn't exist, qualia can't be found anywhere, that doesn't necessarily mean qualia doesn't exist. Because we're so certain of it in our own minds. And science may miss that. That's what this response is trying to argue. I'll give you a bit of evaluation here as well. I'm feeling generous. I don't think this is a very good criticism, really. The whole point of what the Churchians are trying to do is they're trying to draw this distinction out between what's intuitive, on the one hand, and what's true. Something might be intuitive, but not true. If we think about Descartes' conception of the soul seems to add up. It's reasonably intuitive, but it isn't true, right? It isn't accurate. And exactly what the Churchians are trying to do is say, yeah, it's really intuitive that we have these beliefs and desires, but when we use the best tools that we have at our disposal, we cannot find them. And so they don't exist, and so we should eliminate discourse of them. Whereas this criticism is saying, it's really intuitive, we're really certain about these things, therefore we have them. But, I'm not really sure that's very good reasoning at all, and I don't think it's not very scientific, it's not very philosophical either. Just because we're certain of them doesn't mean they exist in the world. And so that might give us reason to reject this response. The next criticism you need to understand is one I think that is much stronger, and that is that folk psychology has good predictive and explanatory power. This criticism really works in two ways. It works to strengthen folk psychology against the materialists who are trying to weaken it, and it tries to weaken eliminative materialism and neuroscience more particularly in the face of eliminative materialists who are trying to strengthen it. So, yeah, as I said, it's working in two different ways. The first part of this is to say that folk psychology often provides really good, correct, accurate explanations for behaviour. So, the fridge example, when I go to the fridge and my analysis of that seems pretty accurate, right? It seems pretty useful. When we analyse behaviour, often folk psychology can do the job that neuroscience cannot yet do. Folk psychology can give us really good explanations for all of these things. It isn't a stagnant theory either. One of the things the Churchians say is that folk psychology is like this myth that has stayed the same. We're kind of using the same account of beliefs and desires that humans 2,000 years ago were doing. But things like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, show ultimately that is a folk psychological concept, but that shows that progress is still being made within folk psychology. Understand that the authors of this wouldn't maybe call themselves a folk psychologist, but their psychology is ultimately based on beliefs and desires and what we tell ourselves and the way we think about ourselves, and ultimately these are folk psychological in nature. And so we strengthen folk psychology. We say, no, actually it is quite good, it is often right, and it is always useful. Folk psychology, on the other hand, eliminative materialism, on the other hand, now we're switching to the other side of the criticism, isn't very good. Neuroscience is good. It has been able to establish things, useful knowledge. It has been able to eliminate different things. So going back to the Cartesian example, Descartes thought that the pineal gland was the area where the mind would interact with the body and the brain. We know that's wrong. We know that the pineal gland is actually responsible for the production of melatonin. And so we can eliminate that view as the pineal gland responsible for this weird metaphysical connection. And so that is an example of neuroscience working. Neuroscience is good, but it just isn't ready yet to eliminate things like beliefs and qualia. It isn't there. It isn't capable of doing that. And so not only is folk psychology quite good, but neuroscience, which has merit, isn't ready to replace our folk psychological accounts. In other words, eliminative materialism could be right in the future, but it's just not correct now. This is a nice nuanced, balanced criticism that allows you to acknowledge just the strengths of materialism, the strengths of folk psychology, and give a nice, as I said, nuanced answer. And so I really favour this criticism. I also find it convincing that at the moment we don't have neuroscience sufficient to justify the rejection of qualia. And so, qualia still works. Folk psychology can account for qualia, neuroscience can't. We have a really nice reason to reject eliminative materialism. The final criticism is that there's something self-defeating, self-refuting about eliminative materialism. So when we make an assertion, when we say something and people take us at our words, we're taking the churchlands at their word, they might say something like, folk psychology is a false theory of mind. The word false might be different in their words. They might say flawed, inaccurate, but they're making a statement there. And we take their statement to be true. Part of what it means to make that genuine assertion is to believe it. We believe that the churchlands believe what they're saying to be true. But something really wrong is going on here then, because the churchlands are using beliefs, they're saying things that they believe, but they're also trying to refute beliefs. So they're doing something really wrong. They're refuting their own argument. They're saying beliefs don't exist, but in saying that beliefs don't exist, they're using beliefs. That seems to be wrong. That seems to give us reason to reject their position as completely backwards and self-defeating. Now, this response seems a little unfair, I would say. I'm going to give you a bit of evaluation here too. I think this is unfair because we're presuming that beliefs actually exist. So, the critic assumes that beliefs exist in order to charge the eliminativist with using them in their assertion. The idea here is that beliefs are the very thing that the eliminative materialist is trying to show don't exist, but we're kind of assuming them, we're assuming they do exist, in order to say that the materialist is making reference to them. So the eliminative materialist is saying, actually there might not be evidence to think that beliefs exist in the world. Like, there are no such things as beliefs when we look into the brain. And so it's not really fair for us, as critics, to say beliefs definitely do exist. Because That's what the debate is about. We can't just assume the thing that the debate is about. And so it seems unfair to charge them with using beliefs because it means we have to assume that beliefs do exist. So we're making an assumption to say that they're being circular. That's the idea here. With that being said, that concludes the 3 criticisms of eliminative materialism. Do check out the course that's free in the description. Do check out the practice questions as well if you're feeling particularly productive. Thank you for watching.